on the practical side, I have to believe the power of our ideas was so great you couldn't live near us and not be affected by it. Look at 17th century Christians are very different from Christians in the 21st century, in part because of their contact with indigenous people of the Americas. That we've forced some changes, and we're still trying to, getting the church to address some of its issues, but it's very different. Philosophy is different. I mean, John Locke and Rousseau and all of these guys looked, thought, and reflected back on this big meaning. So maybe the things that they saw in us were so inspiring that they took it and made it of them. Now, maybe in their ethnocentric arrogance, we can be better indigenous people than the indigenous people, but whatever they took it in, it shifted their thinking. Say like something as simple as confederation. There wasn't these models in Europe, you know, but democracy wasn't breaking out in France and England. When they came here, though, and saw what they thought was free-thinking people, a democratic voice, women and men and children, old people, all had a significant role. This was stunning to a society that was so structured that it shook the foundations of their thought. All of a sudden they found out a man's home wasn't his castle. The longhouse belonged to the women. So it changed, I believe, the way in which Europeans thought about themselves. Now, but because of that, there was also this resentment for the people who had it. And that resentment then led to a whole lot of conflict, dispossession, and regret. And I dare say, you look at American literature in particular, but maybe also Canadian literature, you will sense some of this regret, this longing, this lo the poor Indian, this kind of fantasizing and romanticizing of our nobility in death. So when you see that people are longing to connect, and I think there's a very good connection here. When you look at least when I was younger, you could say that one of the foundations of Canadian society was its respect for the land. People were connected to the land. As simple as, you know, everybody had to have a cottage. People go canoeing, camping. There was this thing, and so where did they learn that thing? Well, for centuries we've been working together on the landscape, be it in the fur trade or on the warpath, but this connection. And one thing I think I learned in moving to Canada after living in New York was that it was a profound family connection. The Loyalists and the Haudenosaunee were family. They weren't political allies. And the intermarriage that took place, so that when Joseph Brant started getting all these blocks of land, who was he giving to? The white men who had Mohawk wives. And so who was running the Indian Department? People who had this connection. So William Johnson. So when you realize that it gets so encoded in your thinking, both the fantasy and the regret, it changes the way you think.